Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks to those who attended. Tom, Mr. Zerbuin, thanks for coming this evening. We are, the purpose of this is our first open house, so to speak. We've had a couple dozen presentations, but they've all been in front of groups in the community. So we've got this evening, and we'll see if we can't do a little bit more marketing and advertising for Thursday night, same time, same place. But we're here to educate folks on the issues related to the 2021 public safety levy. So as public officials, we cannot advocate for or against issues like this, or individuals running for office. That's against the law in the state of Montana, but we can educate. So that is our purpose tonight. It's not to advocate, but to educate. So kind of getting started. Want to talk for a couple minutes about some of the primary drivers of why this public safety levy is coming in front of you here in 2021. On a very positive note, Billings has seen a slow, steady, consistent population growth, investment growth on the commercial side as well for 5+ decades. On the not so positive note, we have seen an increase in crime, particularly violent crime, steadily grow. We'll show you some statistics on that. We've also seen increase in substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness challenges that both the criminal justice system and the police department or fire department finds itself dealing with on a regular basis, daily basis. In order to tackle these challenges, we have taken a much more holistic approach. People tend to see badges, police officers, firefighters out on the street, but this includes you need to have the criminal justice system functioning well. So we will talk about the needs of the courts and the legal staff to properly help victims and prosecute offenders. And last but not least, we're learning more and more every day how code enforcement can be a real deterrent to crime, as well as help us before things get out of hand. So this kind of illustrates that top line is that slow, steady growth rate from some just short of 100,000 back in 2006 to, I've heard numbers that might be 117 inside the city limits with the new census. But of course, Billings being the trade center, we really see between probably 140 to 160 people every day who are doing business in the community. The middle blue line is what's happened to calls for service in the police department. They were frankly slow and steady and consistent with the growth rate until about 2011, and then you see us start to steeply move from roughly 61,000 calls for service to 100,000 calls is what we project we'll be at this year. Similarly, on the fire side, though the graphic, because of kind of the data points, it's not as obvious, but if you do the math, the fire department has also seen a 70+% increase in calls for service for fire services over this past decade. This is a 30-day period. Any citizen can go to billingsmt.gov, go to the police department's website, and you can see crime stats kind of live, very recent. This was a 30-day window because we were hearing people speculate that our calls for service really, right, they only exist in the core downtown, and that's not the case. Yes, the upper left-hand is the downtown midtown, the Heights is there in the upper right, and the west end, and so we do see calls for service, we do see incidents throughout the community. It's no longer a single or a particular area. Now, some things we did during the pandemic when we didn't quite know how to tackle this problem. We were here January 16th in this same room. We had a little bigger audience. I think we had the place full. And we were talking about the full-on set of strategies and solutions to making Billings a safer community. Then we hit the pandemic, which gave us the opportunity to do a peer review. We hired the Center for Public Safety Management, made up of law enforcement and fire professionals and city managers to analyze every 911 call for service for 2019, meet and kind of study the departments, and ultimately they came back with 136 recommendations on how our two departments, police and fire, can be as efficient as possible. Their target wasn't how to reduce crime, their target was efficiencies and kind of peer review as they have conducted, I think, about 350 of these analyses around the country. The other thing we did is we did a statistically valid survey. So we used a uniform survey that many cities have used to gauge how citizens are feeling about their police department and the relationship between the police department and the community. In that 38-page report is also on our website. All three of these reports are on our website if someone wants to look at them. That report said, on a very positive note, not that we don't have challenges between department and citizens, but overall there was a high level of trust and regard between our citizens and our police department. They also, though, recognize pretty strongly the crime challenges that we've witnessed over this past decade. And then last but not least, the voters did approve, and we'll probably talk about that some in Q&A, they did approve a levy last year that kept us from sliding backwards. Those three things took place during the pandemic. All in all, with the strategies that we'll get in more detail on, this ask will invest an additional $7.1 million into public safety services in our city. And this is the breakdown of those by kind of department or function. The cost of this to the median homeowner in town is about $8.33 a month or $100 a year. So median, meaning half of the homes in Billings, Montana are going to pay more than this. Half of the homes in Billings, Montana are going to pay less. This is literally the dead center middle home of all the house taxable values in town. The resources, the people resources, so that prior slide gave you the financial resources. These are the people resources that will be added to these particular functions if voters say yes. Now, the one that does not include any additional people is the mental health and substance abuse services area, where we will be investing in or making grants to local agencies based on their success and ability to help us tackle these challenges. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief St. John to talk about the police department.
Thank you, Chris, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. I want to make sure that everybody understands before I get going on this that although police and fire are probably drawing the most attention of all of our safety levy discussions, the other departments are equally important, and we are intrinsically linked. If you change anything, whether you add it or take it away from any one of these divisions that we're talking about, it affects everybody else. That will come very, very clear when Gina Dahl makes her presentation, because the numbers that she's dealing with on the back end are presented by us on the front end, and you'll see some pretty stark numbers. Obviously, no secret, we've seen a significant increase the last few years in violent crime. Obviously, the pandemic has played a part of that, but we certainly have seen an influx of methamphetamine, which drives all of our violent and property crime. Fentanyl has taken over the #1 threat in the state of Montana over methamphetamine, and not only does that cause criminal behavior, it results in numerous overdose and overdose deaths. So it is something that is very problematic, and it drives our crime, whether it's property or crimes against people. The thing that we want to focus on are 4 major strategies. And as it stands right now, the Billings Police Department is staffed with 156 sworn officers from top to bottom and 25 civilians providing a variety of services. And so what we would like to do with the safety levy ask is to add additional 28 FTEs or full-time employees. And the thing that's interesting is that our peer review didn't say that we needed all of those to be sworn positions, that half could be civilians with the goal to be more efficient and effective with a position that it costs less than an officer. So some of the menial tasks can be taken away from patrolmen and detectives for a lower cost, and then they can get on about the business of being proactive and getting more involved in preventing crime. The 4 strategic goals that we talk about here obviously need to get a handle on violent crime. It certainly affects the perception that our citizens have and people who may want to move a family or bring a business here. When you're having double and triple digit increases in violent crime, that doesn't play very well. There was a time a couple years ago we had flattened that trend, and it's starting to turn it down, and then the pandemic, we kind of lost it a little bit, but we're starting to see that turn. Downtown safety, this goes to the transients, the homelessness, the people who are suffering substance use disorder. And then there's a population here that is suffering none of those. They make it very clear that they're here to party. So we have a wide variety of population downtown. That's a very complex issue to deal with. Not all of it is law enforcement, and we need to be partnered with our social services. The other thing I will say about that is, although we talk about downtown safety, this problem has manifested itself to the rest of Billings. We're seeing similar behavior in the Heights, specifically in the Walmart area, and the same on the West End. So it's not unique to the downtown. It's felt there pretty prevalently, but we are aware we need to extend our services and get a handle on that citywide. Traffic safety obviously has been a priority of the police department and the city council for many, many years. We have far too many injury accidents, far too many DUIs still. Unfortunately, past couple of weeks, we've had 3 or 4 fatalities. Alcohol's involved, and we're pretty soon to introduce recreational marijuana. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get drivers to obey the rules, obey the laws, be mindful, be patient, be kind to their fellow drivers so we can avoid having these issues. And then last, as Chris indicated, we are partners with our mental health providers. As it stands right now, when you have a situation that deals with any of those co-occurring mental illness, substance abuse, or any transient type stuff, police and fire are coming. And so we're working very hard to make sure that police and fire are only coming when necessary. So partnerships with social services to get the right tools, to get the right service, and again, freeing up public safety resources for public safety matters, not social issues. And so therein lies the investment that Chris talked about, but in the meantime, we are very, very critical partners in that process. So what are we going to do? With the existing personnel and with the additional FTEs. 14 of them are sworn positions. But what we want to do, and we know this works because this is exactly the focused policing strategy that we did a couple years ago, and we turn all major categories down double-digit percentages. So, we want to be targeting our violent offenders. We know they're out there doing the same thing, getting after people with firearms, drug activity, street crimes, and use our crime analysts and those available statewide. There are some significant intelligence resources that we can tap into to track some of these people down and try to get the deterrence. As far as downtown, we know across the board that an increased officer presence deters crime. And we also know that not necessarily do they go to the neighborhood next door and perpetuate crime. They will move. But without the presence down there, then you're going to have the issues that we do. So again, with the added resources, like to put more people on bikes, more foot patrol, and then obviously we can get more cars out there. That helps us as well. The hotspot enforcement, again, utilizing our analysis, we find out where it's happening, we find out when. For the most part, we know who, and we will target that particular area with a dedicated crew and get some results there. And again, we really want to build upon our crime prevention program that we have, and the Chamber of Commerce is on board too with that. CPTED is an acronym for crime prevention through environmental design. They've done several presentations. We can do them for free, as can they. But what this basically does is ramps up the crime prevention side of things, and it puts a little bit of ownership back with property owners rather than just sitting here, asking me, what are you going to do about it? You're going to have a little skin in the game here, and it's been very effective where we have it implemented. And then talk about our traffic enforcement, same thing here. We want to be able to focus with problematic areas, problematic drivers. Right now, it's kind of a whack-a-mole approach. People complain, we send our traffic unit over there. They get it knocked down a little bit, and then we go someplace else where they call. So we want to have the resources to focus on areas and get that compliance that we need to have. And with that, I will turn it over to Chief Valdez.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. So what you have is 161 dedicated men and women in your fire department, to include the 911 center. We're located throughout the city in 7 facilities, plus a 911 call center. Billings Fire Department is kind of a misnomer in the fact that we do more than just fight fire. We're an all hazards department. So what that means is we respond to all types of fires, obviously, rescues, rivers, REMs, high technical types of rescues, hazardous materials, so fuel spills and gas leaks, and then EMS, which is the biggest portion of what we do. So since 2010, our call volume has increased by about 76%, as Chris had alluded to earlier. Last year, we responded to over 18,000 calls, and this year we anticipate going well over 19,000. So approximately out of those 19,000 calls, 60% of those are emergency medical response. And so the issue is that we send a large fire truck to every single one of those calls. So why do we send a large fire truck to every one of those calls? So all personnel that is on the fire department are at least an EMT level, and about a quarter of our personnel are paramedics able to provide advanced life support. Some patients require more help, whether it be CPR or extraction out of the building. And then we're also strategically located, like I said earlier, helping us to get there much quicker than other resources. Also, that big red fire truck is the big toolbox that has everything we need in it. So if that responds to a medical call, it could quite potentially get called right away before getting back to the station to a different type of call, whether it be a rescue or a hazmat, needing or requiring that fire engine. So that is why we send it. So what are we doing to fix that issue? So recently we just had a study done by CPSM to help us address efficiency within the department. And we wanted to take a 3-part approach, and the first of that being priority dispatch. So it's changing the way we dispatch will make us more efficient and be able to send better responses or the more appropriate resources to the appropriate call. The second piece of that is a contract with an ambulance provider to tailor that to our community's needs. And then the third piece of that is to start another division within the department. And this program would be called MRT, or Mobile Response Teams. And what that looks like is basically a 10 personnel division that's overseen by a chief, 2 teams of 2, one in the east and one in the west, using lightweight vehicles, reducing fuel usage and wear and tear on those engines. Reduce maintenance costs, quicker response as these vehicles will be roving throughout the city, and then they'll be fully staffed during peak hours. And then another ask is the deputy fire marshal, and this particular individual is, thank you. This particular individual will be responsible for going to what we call target hazards in the communities and helping mitigate issues that arise with those big box stores. The target hazards would be a hospital, a school, your Lowe's, your Home Depots, such as that. And then also they're able to bring back intel for us to help mitigate any issues that should arise in those particular target hazards. And then lastly, a logistics officer. And what we have found by especially assigning this position over the last 3 years is we've experienced reduced costs due to greater oversight with our equipment, and then better networking for competitive pricing, and then lastly, improved accountability and reduction of lost equipment. And so with that, I will turn it over to Gina.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I am going to talk a little bit about the City Attorney's Office and the prosecution services, as well as courts. I won't touch on courts too much, but clearly they go hand in hand. This first slide is just showing you the trend in the criminal cases that we've had over the last several years. Starting in 2016 to our current year, the trend has clearly been an upward trend. Our total cases have increased pretty dramatically. They went down just a bit in 2020, although you'll see in a subsequent slide that the violent offenses have increased pretty dramatically, or did increase pretty dramatically in 2020, but the nonviolent crimes went down, so that's why you see a slight dip there in 2020, and I can only attribute that to people not committing as many shopliftings and nonviolent crimes because they were confined to their homes, basically. But in the current year, you can see at the end of June, we were at about 3,000 cases, and so by the end of the year, we're projecting to have 6,000 plus cases. This next slide is showing you a little bit more about what our caseload is. It shows our average caseload per prosecutor. We have, well, this is only going to show you the last 3 years. In 2018 and 2019, we had 4 non-domestic violence prosecutors. And in 2018, each of those did I say 4? We have 3 non-domestic violence prosecutors and 1 domestic violence prosecutor. And in 2018, each non-domestic violence prosecutor handled over 1,400 cases, and in 2019, each prosecutor handled over 1,800 cases. And then we have 1 domestic violence prosecutor who had 790 cases in 2018, 878 cases in 2019, and you can see in 2020, we got a 5th prosecutor. So that brought down that middle bar, which is showing you the average caseload per non-domestic violence prosecutor. So that brought that down to a little over 1,000. But you can see that that's still 2.5 times the best practices standard, which is recommended by the American Bar Association. So we're well over what is best practices for a caseload for prosecutors. In 2020, you can see that our sole domestic violence prosecutor, that blue bar there, is showing that he had over 1,200 cases, which is way more than best practices. I think it's important to note that domestic violence cases they take more time, more resources to prosecute, so we generally a domestic violence prosecutor should generally have half the amount of half the cases that a non-domestic violence prosecutor should have, And so we are well over that, and that kind of caseload is just simply unsustainable. This slide is giving you a bit of an idea of the overall domestic violence cases that are being brought to our office. Back in 2015, we were receiving from our law enforcement agencies, the police department essentially, they were referring 575 cases to prosecute. And domestic violence cases, so I'm only talking about those cases. That's generally assaults, partner, family member assaults, sexual offenses, stalking, order of protection violations, the kinds of offenses where there's a partner or a family member who's a victim. There's a variety of those, but those are generally the kinds of cases we're talking about. So in 2015, we got a total of 575 referred to us. Our prosecutor was able to file 515 of those, so we were prosecuting about 90%. But as you can see, the number has dramatically increased over those last several years to where in 2020 we received over 1,200 cases to prosecute. You know, he's only got a certain amount of capacity that he's been maintaining over the last several years. He's 500, close to 600 cases that he can prosecute. In 2020, he was maintaining that level, but that's less than 50% of what's being referred to our office. So essentially, we are, this is really just about offender accountability. If we're able to, and this is a problem that has been coming for a long time. This is not just from the last couple of years. Our office simply needs to catch up. The first new prosecutor we got, as I mentioned in that previous slide, was last year. That's the first new prosecutor that our office has seen since 2007. So if we can get our office fully staffed with prosecutors, I think that would really result in more offender accountability. And how that would happen is these prosecutors would have a reduced caseload. If they can reduce their caseloads, they can actually focus their time and attention on those cases, which means they can get more cases prosecuted. They can prosecute those cases more thoroughly, potentially less diversions, potentially less dismissals. If they have time to focus on those caseloads, it's less triaging of cases, deciding which offender is worse than the other. This victim was hurt more severely, so we're going to choose to prosecute that. Unfortunately, those are the really tough decisions that are having to be made right now. So reduced caseloads with more staffing will result ultimately in better victim services and more offender accountability. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Wyeth with Code Enforcement.
All right, thank you, Gina. So the Code Enforcement Division for the city, we have basically manage about 4,500 cases a year, and we're dealing with all types of different code violations from in the summer, weed violations with people not mowing or taking care of their yards, to junk vehicles, to people parking in front of fire hydrants or blocking clear vision at corners or intersections, and then to people with junk of various sorts in their yards, kind of like the picture you see on the screen right now. And so it's a whole wide gamut of that. And with that 4,500 cases right now, we have 3 code enforcement officers who are assigned to different like districts of the city. So they each cover a third, basically, of our city. And then we have 1 officer who specifically is focused on the real problem properties where we have abandoned structures, properties that are not coming into compliance even after a lot extensive work with the code enforcement officer from that district area, and those are ending up going to court. And so we have become these real long processes, and so we have 1 officer who's just focused on those types of cases. What we're really doing right now is we're reacting. So we get complaints, we go out and check to see if they're valid, and then develop cases. And so the officers are just constantly responding to the complaints that come in across the city, and there's really not any kind of capacity to be able to be proactive with some of these cases and these properties. And that's what's important with this proposed levy, is that the idea here is being able to have code enforcement, if we're able to have some more proactive options and with those resources, to be able to then help work better with addressing properties that then turn into crime problems and serious problems, fires, et cetera, where then we have law enforcement and fire department becoming involved, and it becomes a very much more both labor intensive and complicated process. One of the things that with our efforts here, and you're seeing a couple before and afters, is again trying to deal with properties before they get too seriously kind of dilapidated or into situations where trying to get them back cleaned up and safe and into compliance becomes a real long and challenging process. And so that's part of the effort here with the potential with the levy, is for us to be able to get onto these before they get so bad that then we have crime, we have other things happening, and we also then have to often go to court to try to get them remedied. And so our strategy basically with the proposed levy is to add 3 more officers to our current staff and really kind of tackle things in 3 areas: education and outreach, where again we have really limited time right now to communicate with our the neighborhood task forces and go out and talk to the community about what is code enforcement, what are code enforcement violations, what are the things that you should pick up the phone and call us, and you know that this is something, that this is a code enforcement issue, not a police issue or another issue, that you should start with us. So we need to be able to do more of that. That will help both with people understanding what they should be calling in about, and also to have them be calling us sooner when they start to see problems, instead of some of them, wait, and then the property is really in significant trouble. There's programs also for residents. When we do have some properties, people are unable to clean them up. They have various things going on, and we try to connect them with services to help them as we're trying to help with the actual property cleanup. And so that's another thing that we could do more of than we're able to do right now. Compliance, in terms of really looking across areas of the city, whether we're seeing trends of certain types of complaints that we see that we're seeing more of them, and then being able to say, okay, we need to take a couple officers and really focus on those areas that we're seeing this increase in a certain type of code enforcement violation. And those can be seasonal as well: weeds in the summer, snow removal in the winter, things like that. But they also can be other types of violations that start to increase in certain situations. And then also focusing on the working with like the task forces, schools, et cetera, with helping making sure that there's safe routes to school, that kids and people that are using the pedestrian facilities aren't running into branches that are too low, or people parked across the sidewalk, and things of that nature. And then lastly, part of was included in the legal resources is some additional legal assistance for the code enforcement team to be able to have more capacity and preparation for when we do have to go to court and we do have to deal with those more complex legal issues, and being able to have extra support to help those officers prepare for those cases. And so that's another piece of this, along with lastly being able to do some what we've called in the past neighborhood cleanups, where we've actually been able to work with Public Works and work with the property owners and other elements of the city to say, okay, we're going to go in and look at this area of a neighborhood. There may be streetlights that are out. There may be alleys that need to be graded and cleaned up. So we'll deal with both the city public infrastructure side and make sure those things are taken care of, and then we'll also deal with the property owners and the private side to get their properties cleaned up. And that's been shown, and we've only been able to do a couple of those, again, over quite a few years now, over 10 years, because of we're limited by our resources, that when you do that, you start to really address the sustainability and the safety in the neighborhood. It then reduces those calls for service for police and other agencies, and then it can really kind of set that neighborhood on a good trajectory. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Chris. Go from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Wyeth. And I think we just got one more slide here. We want to really just kind of circle back on what outcomes we're looking for. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about retaining, a vibrant economy and a community in which our kids, our grandkids choose to stay here. Those who are looking to relocate to Montana consider Billings as a great place for them to relocate to, whether it's to invest in a business or raise a family. And we know that safe neighborhoods are critical to that. So ultimately, our goal is to improve the safety of our community across the board. It is to increase the efficiency of the services we deliver. So when we did that peer review, it really was all about making sure we were using tax dollars to the best of our ability. And we got a whole series of recommendations to us, most of which didn't add cost to this, and in fact, lowered these costs from where we were 18 months ago. Collaboration with our partners at the county level, in the nonprofit areas with substance abuse and social services, state and federal are critical to all of this. Maybe in the questions and answers, we'll get into some of those more specific areas. Mental health, substance abuse, we've talked about that. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We have had a number of professionals, both internal to the city and in our community, tied to the hospitals and other service providers, look at best practices in Houston, Texas, in San Diego, in Eugene, Oregon, and see what can we do to take what has worked and bring it into our community, adjust it to make it Billings, but have it be effective, and that's the goal here. And yes, we do want to hold criminals accountable. For victims, and sometimes we lose sight of it. For every one of these violent crimes, there is a victim, and there's probably a family and other loved ones who are affected. And when criminals aren't held accountable, the officers tell me they see this, the emboldenedness and the next level of crime tends to not just be at that equal level. So the accountability is critical at the front end to avoid some of what we're dealing at the back end. And then, as the chief says, we're somewhat legendary in Billings. Our traffic lights are not advisory. We are to be respectful of traffic in speeds and care, again, in our community. And last but not least, we want people to feel safe wherever they are in Billings. I still firmly believe we are still too small of a city to accept the notion that I don't feel safe in a public park at night or in the downtown at night. And statistically, we've gotten pretty consistent feedback from our citizens over the past 10, 12 years that situation has gotten worse and worse in their minds, and we want to reverse that. So with that, that's a wrap on the presentation. I would ask that our presenters come up front. We're also Facebook Live right now as well, and answer any questions we have from our attendee.
I must be the attendee.
Tom, you're the attendee.
Good. I got tons of questions.
No way.
First and foremost, this is a permanent tax increase, correct? It
Yes.
doesn't go down in future years or disappear. It stays there forever and ever.
It is expected to be there permanently.
All right. We're hiring 14 policemen, so I'm assuming we have to have at least 7 additional police cars fully equipped. We're hiring 10 firemen to staff 2 lightweight vehicles that we don't own. So we're gonna buy 2 vehicles for the fire department and equip them. Hire 3 code enforcement officers. They can't do anything, they can't get out in the community unless they have a vehicle, so there's 3 vehicles. That's 12 vehicles we're gonna buy immediately and outfit. Currently, all the city's vehicles are replaced under the vehicle replacement plan. But here, we gotta buy these 12 vehicles in year 1, and then we're charged in year 2, 3, 4, and in perpetuity for them again. And where's that money gonna go? That gonna go for slush fund?
So the expenses that you're talking about or asking about, Tom, the equipment is a part of what this levy includes. So, and you've nailed it. So you've got the purchase on the front end with a couple of exceptions. I think on the mobile response units, we actually have one or both of those vehicles. I'm not, because we have tried, there was a different approach at this several years ago. So, but I think let's just use your assumption as being far more right than wrong. Is equipment included? Yes, it's a part of these numbers. And then ongoing on the equipment side, the city has an excellent equipment replacement program. We will charge ourselves, we'll charge the taxpayers for the replacement cost of that, so that when it needs to be replaced, the resources are there to get the best value we can on the replacement.
So the money we pay in year one buys the vehicles. Year 2, 3, 4, and on, where's the money gonna go paid for the vehicles? This is not chicken feed. This is real dollars, taxpayer dollars. Where's it gonna go in the oncoming years?
And that's why the ask is what it is at $7.1 million. I mean, that is a lot of money, and that isn't just the personnel, it's the equipment, the operational expenses.
We got some slush fund money in this levy for future years, I understand that. Now we get to, we're gonna hire 14 policemen, 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a judge, so that we can make all these arrests and drop down violent crime and make criminals accountable. How are you gonna make criminals accountable when the jail is full? Where is accountability without jail space?
Well, Tom, it's certainly a challenge. We're not going to stop doing what we're doing, and we're not going to shirk our responsibility. We are working at the higher levels with the sheriff, with the county commissioners, with our partners at the state of Montana, who is a big contributor to the population down there, to get some of those people out. So it's not that we're just washing our hands of that because it's not our deal. It's a complicated problem, and we're working very hard to do that. That being said, Tom, like I said, we're going to do what we're going to do. We are responsible to provide public safety for the citizens of Billings. And as it stands right now, we need more resources to do that appropriately, and we'll keep working on the problem down there. Other issues roll into the mental health part, and that is some of these individuals do not belong in the ER and they don't belong in jail. So if we can divert people out of the justice system, then that's going to help alleviate some of those problems. And then frankly, we got a crime problem. And through our deterrence, through our increased presence and some of the programs that we know work, if we can stop some of the crime that's happening, work the problem on the back end, then we have room to maneuver on the accountability part.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of, at least one point to that. Accountability is not always just about going to jail. The problem that we're seeing right now is that we're simply just not unable to get people charged. And you can't get, a conviction alone is holding somebody accountable. We very frequently don't seek jail time. The accountability is simply convicting them. It can be fines, it could be alternative sentences, it could be treatment, it could be, whether that be chemical dependency treatment or mental health treatment. There's a lot of ways to hold a person accountable. There are all kinds of conditions of sentences, suspended sentences, probationary sentences that hold people accountable, but we don't even get there if we can't get them charged and convicted. So that's a really important part of the accountability aspect from my perspective, from my office's perspective. We simply need to be able to get them charged in order to get them convicted, in order to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Gina. I just want to add one piece to the front end, as the chief mentioned. So this past legislative session, we did have some success. It was not nearly the teeth that we wanted it to have. We approached the session working in partnership on both sides of the aisle here with local legislators, Democrats and Republicans. It's an issue that they seem willing to help us on, and that is the crime problem, whichever side of the aisle they're on. So we did pass a bill through the system that requires that if someone is incarcerated at any of the county jails in the state of Montana and they have not moved that individual out of that jail within 10 days of the case being fully adjudicated, the judge will receive a letter from the Department of Corrections as to why that individual is not moved. Now, we wanted that to come with penalties. We wanted that to come with teeth. That didn't pass. But now we will have a paper trail to use this 2023 session to be able to, I think, better point out to the state of Montana just how many individuals they are relying on local counties, Yellowstone County in this case, we as county taxpayers, to house their inmates. Next week, we are doing a follow-up meeting with local legislators in preparation of the 2023 session. Small group, sheriff, chief, myself, at the federal level as well, to begin preparing for 2023, because this cannot be tackled just as a city. Thank you. Other questions? I'm sure you've got some more questions for us. We appreciate them.
Mental health and substance abuse, $415,000. We already give Rimrock Foundation a ton of money with MAP, trying to sober up people. An addict will be an addict until that addict chooses not to be an addict. I don't care how much money you bribe that addict with, they will be an addict if they want to be an addict. They will be sober if they want to be sober. Mental health, our state hospital in Warm Springs has dealt with for years. And it is a joke on our tax bill, and everybody knows it. Mental health is also something you cannot buy. It's something that is really tough to get, and you cannot use a pharmaceutical drug or combination of drugs to maintain mental stability. Where is this money going to do us any good? I look at all of this. I don't see a bite out of crime. I don't see a bite out of ugliness downtown. I see a bite out of my billfold. That's what I see. There's a huge bite out of my billfold with no return.
You know, I wouldn't try to argue issues that you may have more knowledge of me relative to abuse. To your last comments, these are specific strategies to improve the safety of our community. Yes, they do cost money. So I believe all three are happening. We're asking taxpayers to consider the investment, and the chiefs, city attorney, code enforcement have strategies to implement with resources to make a difference. You know, last night we looked at the dirty dozen. I guess the truth is we could have the dirty 5 dozen code enforcement violations. Should we be shocked that we really haven't made that much headway on the code enforcement issue when we've had no additional resources as the amount of problems have waned? And the data really shows our community is facing a steep hill of increased problems that we're facing and dealing with. So the city attorney has got something to answer, and I appreciate her feedback.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond. First of all, I'm going to qualify my comments. I'm clearly not a substance abuse counselor, but I have been part of a treatment court team. And while I completely understand and acknowledge your statement that a person who's addicted is going to remain addicted until they want to be sober, I respectfully disagree with that. I think that that's the case many times. But when there's criminal activity involved and a person is forced to do treatment because the alternative is going to jail for a significant amount of time, and I've seen this over and over again in treatment courts, a person makes these choices, and after a while it sticks. After a while, when they're forced to be in treatment court for a significant amount of time, they make those changes, and they ultimately come to the realization that they want to be sober. And with the addition of another court, we have just one court right now, one municipal court, and so we're limited to the number of treatment courts that can be offered. With the addition of a court, there can be an additional treatment court, which opens a whole nother avenue for getting people treated, getting people into the treatment court so that they whether you call it forced treatment or not, that they come to those realizations ultimately. So it's, I say those qualified, I'm not a substance abuse counselor, but I have seen this over and over again at being part of a treatment court team.
And I apologize, I should have referenced specifically the $400,000. It is real money, and yet it is, we do not expect that it is going to solve the problem in and of itself. It does put the city at the table, specifically making investments in programs that work. And the city council has been very clear with me that if we don't have performance in what we're investing those dollars in, then we will need to find other successful avenues at which to spend that money. So that $400,000 is real money. It's equivalent to 2 mills. It was a deliberate number. So it costs a typical homeowner in Billings, Montana, I think about $6 a year. So they're making a $6 a year investment at this front end where we know we're spending literally millions of dollars a year dealing with the consequences of. And our 6 is being added to county and other dollars. So that's not the only dollars, but I see it as putting the city specifically with some skin in the game and at the table trying to direct and help implement the strategies most recently put together by Substance Abuse Connect, 82 different entities in our community who know a lot more than I do about these issues and these challenges we face. So, Tom, other questions you have? Comments? Yes.
All of the mental health and substance abuse dollars, will the city council be solely responsible for every dollar? Or will the city administrator have a slush fund of part of it to decide how it's spent or given away?
It'll be done budget year by budget year. I mean, very, very specifically, what I would expect is there will be line items of where those grants are going. And ultimately, the council will appropriate those funds and the administration will have the limitations or the authority to spend that money based on what the elected body empowers them to do. Other questions?
That does it for me.
Does it for you? Well, we appreciate your time tonight, Tom, truly appreciate you coming. Just in case folks were waiting, we're going to do this again. We're going to do it in 2 days. I don't care if we have one other person coming. We're going to get the word out more on social media. Hope we can get some more people attending. We do have some people watching on Facebook. Thank you for that. We will be back in here 2 nights from now, Thursday evening, 6 p.m., from 6 to 7. Looks like it's going to be plenty of time with an hour to cover things, but please consider coming, asking questions, as well as go to billingsmt.gov/P Public Safety Mill Levy, PSML, and all this information, including this video, will be posted there for our citizens to watch, the reports and these presentations. Thank you very much for your time.